This reading from Revelation today paints a beautiful picture of God's promised future for all of creation. We hear about a city that has walls and a gate, but the gates are never closed because there is no night and no need to close the gates. We hear that God is the temple, and there is no need for a temple in that place any longer. We hear about this beautiful river that flows through the middle of the city, and the river is the place of life and healing for the nations. Last week we heard the first part of this text, and there we heard that in this place there will be no mourning, no pain, no death, no sorrow. Every tear will be wiped away from our faces. And then we hear that God is the light in this place. The picture of God's promised future for creation is beautiful and wonderful, and yet it's hard to believe. It's hard for us to imagine that God is truly at work establishing this future when we look around and see the world as it is. Theologians call this time in which we live the already but not yet. Already, God has conquered the powers of sin and death and evil and darkness for all time. Already the victory has been won, but not yet has the full reality of that victory been established on earth as it is in heaven. And so here we are, trapped, it seems, in the in-between. Knowing, being promised that the victory has been won, knowing, being promised that God will fulfill all these things, and yet we look around and we wonder. We look around at our world where homes and prisons, schools and nations are surrounded by walls and gates that are closed to either keep in or keep out. We look around at our world and we see places like this river, but the river is not for healing. The river is dirty and disgusting, and we have ruined it. We look around at our world and we see not light everywhere, but darkness seeming to creep more and more into everything. We look around at our world and see not a place where tears are wiped away, but where pain and mourning and fear and death and darkness are everywhere. And we wonder how we can hold on to the promise of God's future as we look at the reality of our present. One of my favorite commentaries is called True to Our Native Land, an African-American commentary on the New Testament. And just like every week that I remember to read it, this week when I read it, I was not disappointed by what I found there. I was not disappointed by what the commentator had to say about this text from Revelation. As usual, when I read this commentary, it spoke to my heart, and I hold on tight to what I read there. You see, the commentator on this text from Revelation focused on this one line that says, God is the light for the people. And the commentator went on and on about what this means, not for God, but also for us. For you see, light is a very interesting thing. Light acts as both a particle and a wave, and we don't know how, and we don't know why, but we know that it is true. Light travels faster than anything we have created or observed, and we don't know why, and we don't know how, but we know that it is true. When light shines, it changes things. The light from the sun brings forth vegetation. The light in a room changes how we see what is in that room. Light can dispel fear as well as darkness. Light changes things. And yet, the commentator pointed out, light itself does not change. Light simply is light. It is what it has always been, and it is we who are changed in its presence rather than it being changed. And so if God is the light, God remains unchanged, steadfast, the same today as God was yesterday and will be into the future. And this God is a God who has kept promises. So this is how we know that God's promises of a future that seem unattainable are, in fact, certain. Light does not change. God does not change when it encounters other things, but we are changed by our encounters with God. We are changed, and sometimes it is comforting and wonderful, like walking into a dark room and turning on the light and seeing that everything is as it should be. But sometimes encountering God is like walking out of a dark building into the light of day, and it is painful and hard and challenging, and we may wish we could have gone back to that dark place. But we are changed by every encounter that we have with God, even as God remains steadfast through all of this. God is the light for all the people. In a few moments, we will baptize Paige here, and we will hear these words. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." God, Christ, is the light for all the world to see. And we are called to be people who reflect that light back to others. We are called to be people who are changed by that light even when it is difficult, even when we would rather some things remain hidden in the dark. We are called to share God's light in all the world. We are called to be a people who carry that light into the darkest places of this world. We are called to be a people who live as if God's promised future is happening right now. For in fact, God is at work right now, establishing the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. We are called with those who long ago were certain that God in Christ would return tomorrow. We are called to live as if this new reality is coming today. And so we must care for those who are in need. Feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, shelter to those who have none, clothing to the naked, to visit and care for those who are sick and in prison. We are called to do the work of establishing the kingdom on earth as in heaven. And as we do this work, may we be reminded that there's another thing about light that's interesting and somewhat weird. When light is shared, it does not diminish, but grows more and more. So as we share the light of God with one another and the world, the light continues to spread to all the corners of the earth. When we share the light, we are reminded of what we hear in John 1. The darkness cannot destroy the light. For darkness to destroy the light, it must snuff out every single bit of light. But for light to get rid of the darkness, it takes only a spark. May we know that the light has come into the world, and though the darkness tries to overcome it, it has not, it cannot, and it will not. May we go and share that light with all the world.